In this video, we're going to paint a robin's nest with eggs in it. And I'm going to be teaching you some fundamentals of watercolor along the way. In general, when I'm painting in watercolor, I start with a bigger brush and start working very wet. And then I go to thinner brushes as I paint each layer. And also the brush is not as wet with water and paint as I go. And that's how I'm able to build upon the layers and get more detailed, make the painting more detailed as I go along. So the first thing that we're going to do is I'm going to start with this tan color. And after I get paint on my brush, I dip it in the water, so it's very watery. And what I'm going to paint is just the base of the nest, leaving an area to insert the eggs. So this is just like the inside. Then I'm going to switch to brown. Get some brown on my brush, I dip it in the water, and I'm doing the outer edge of the nest. Now, if you're looking at a somewhat side angle of a nest, this side, because of the angle, will be bigger. Okay, so I'm just painting. I'm not yet painting like the shape of twigs because I want there to be a background color when I do the twigs. I don't want white to show through. Now, because my paint is wet, when my brown touches that lighter color, you'll see that it bleeds into it. And that's okay. As I said before, the beginning layer, I usually work very wet. So I'm just going to make the nest a little more organic looking. And I'm going to add something over here that is actually a branch, what the nest is resting on. And then I'm going to add basically some blobs of green that later I'll define a little bit more, and these are just like the leaves on the tree. Now for this painting, I'm just working in my multimedia sketchbook. I've actually secured with binder clips the page down because when the page gets wet, it will start to wrinkle and buckle. I'm going to get a little turquoise, water it down, and add it up here for a little peek at the blue sky. And I'm totally fine with the colors running into one another. This is my first layer. So as I was saying, I have binder clips holding my page down. If I was using a piece of watercolor paper, I would tape it down to a piece of cardboard so that the paper wouldn't wrinkle when it got all wet. So this is pretty much my first layer. Oh, I'm going to switch to a smaller brush. Notice I have a piece of scrap paper here so I could test my colors. And I'm going to add the shape of 3 eggs, and one of them is somewhat hidden by the side. Okay, so now I'm just going to let it dry before I do anything else. That's a very important thing in watercolor, is that if you don't want the paint to bleed, you take time and let it dry. So I've given my painting a little time to dry. Let me just move it up a little bit. And I'm going to work on the next layer. By the way, I'm going to include a link to my blog where I'll have a reference photo of a nest that if you want to paint from the reference photo. I actually took it, climbed up on a ladder and peeked into a nest and took the photo. So that'll be on my blog, My Creative Resolution, and you can paint from that. Okay, so now I'm going to start adding details to the nest. I'm going to switch to a thinner brush. The idea is I'm going to keep the inside of the nest a little lighter so that there's, you can tell the difference between the inside and the outer edge. So there'll be some depth to it. My eggs are a little small, but that's okay. So now I'm going to use brown, and I'm not going to dip my brush in the water. I don't want it to be as liquidy. And now I'm just going to start making branch lines. And they can overlap. I don't want to fill it all in because I do want to see some of the lighter areas. And we're going to let that part dry, and we're going to work on a different part. Now we're going to work on the inside of the nest. And I want my brown to be a little lighter. You know what I'm going to do? I'm going to mix it with the tan color. Because I want something a little bit darker than the tan, but not as dark as the brown. And then I'm going to water it down. Because I want to put, it's a little too dark. I want to put strokes, flat strokes, in the nest for the bottom of the nest. And they're just crisscrossing around the eggs. And I can go a little bit darker in spots so that it has a little bit more depth to it. Okay, now I'm going to work on adding some smaller branches, giving a little bit more to this branch, and adding some smaller branches off there. So that this tree has other branches. From those other branches, I can add some little pine needles. And I think we need, in the background, just a little bit darker of greenery for the bush, because our first layer is a little light. I'm just gonna, in those wet areas, allow some brown to bleed into it. That's the great thing about watercolor. When it's wet, it just creates like a magical effect by like letting it bleed into the paint. I feel like it kind of does the work for you. Okay, so my tree branch looks a little flat. So I'm going to darken it. And then I'm going to go back to my thinner brush. I'm actually going to use some black and just kind of add it. Oops, got a little green on my black. Just kind of add it to give a little texture to the branch. Okay, now I'm going to use the black to add dark areas to the nest. And really, when you're creating a watercolor painting, you can add as many layers of detail and use a thinner and thinner brush as you go. It's all what kind of style you want it to be, how realistic. You know, and if I want to lighten this black, I can just mix it with water. Then I have more like a gray shadow area. I'm going to switch to a thinner brush and use that gray to kind of add some shadows to the nest. Gonna go back. I want to add some more brown twigs. And just like, you know, the bird built the nest and kept adding twigs and twigs and more twigs, we're just adding brush strokes and more brush strokes. You know, I recommend that you visit my blog and download the reference photo, because it's the reference photo that will give you like the info for where you should put the details and what it should look like. Now I'm going to go back to the black and add a little bit more. I'm going to get a thinner brush, add some more detail here. Okay, now I want to better define, when I'm done this, I want to better, that's too dark, so I just wet my brush and I can kind of lighten it and blot it on the paper towel. Now the last thing I want to do is better define my eggs. And I, don't want to use black on the blues. And a really great trick is to mix a color with its complement, the color that's across from it on the color wheel. That's a little dark, so I'm just going to water that down. Just giving another layer of blue to the eggs. Just lifting a little bit of the color with the damp brush and blotting it. Just want to add a little green in there to define the nest a little bit. So what I was saying, to create like a shadow color for the eggs, what you do is you mix a color with its complement. A complement is the color across the color wheel from it. So blue and orange are complements. So instead of using a black, I'm mixing my own shadow color. And my eggs are still a little wet. Ideally, I would wait for them to be more dry. Whoop. It's too watered down. But I can use this color I mixed to create a shadow, a darker edge to my eggs. But I'm going to have to wait for them to dry because they're very wet right now to do that last step. Okay, so I let the eggs dry a little bit, and I have my mix of the turquoise with a little orange. So I have this darker color that I can use just to add a little bit of a shadow. To the edge of the, and then I'm just gonna blend it out a little bit. And there's my robin's nest. I hope you liked the video. Please like and subscribe. Thank you.